medieval queens. They wore crowns, lived in castles, and sometimes held immense power. But what if their greatest legacy wasn't just their own reign, but the very real world-altering impact of the children they raised? From the early Middle Ages around 800 CE to the cusp of the Renaissance in the late 14s, mothers bore future kings, emperors, and queens who would launch wars, forge dynasties, and reshape entire nations, whose sons ignited the 100 Years' War, whose daughters sealed peace treaties, whose boys vanished from history, yet changed it forever. Prepare to uncover the stories of 9 medieval queens whose children were the ultimate game changers. Number 1. Elizabeth Woodville. Elizabeth Woodville's life was a whirlwind of social ascent, royal marriage, and tragic loss, making her a central figure in the dramatic and violent period of English history known as the Wars of the Roses. Born around 1437, she came from relatively humble gentry origins compared to the great noble families of England. Her father, Sir Richard Woodville, was a knight, and her mother, Jacquetta of Luxembourg, though descended from royalty, was not of the highest English nobility. Elizabeth was a widow with 2 sons from her first marriage, when she secretly married King Edward IV in 1464. This marriage was scandalous and unprecedented. English kings typically married foreign princesses to forge alliances, not English widows of commoner status. It immediately alienated many powerful nobles, especially the king's chief advisor, Richard Neville, the Earl of Warwick, known as the Kingmaker. Despite the controversy, Elizabeth Woodville became Queen of England, and her rise infuriated those who believed they had a greater right to influence the crown. She quickly used her new position to advance her family, securing advantageous marriages and positions for her many siblings and children from her first marriage. This rapid ascent of the Woodville family further inflamed aristocratic resentment, contributing to the factionalism that defined the Wars of the Roses, a brutal struggle for the English throne between the houses of Lancaster and York. Elizabeth was a Yorkist queen, her husband, Edward IV, having seized the throne from the Lancastrian Henry VI. Elizabeth Woodville bore King Edward IV 10 children, 7 daughters, and 2 sons who survived to adulthood. Her most significant children for the course of English history were her sons, Edward V and Richard, Duke of York, famously known as the Princes in the Tower, and her eldest daughter, Elizabeth of York. These children, born into the heart of a dynasty, still struggling to consolidate its power, would become central figures in one of England's most enduring mysteries and its most decisive dynastic shift. When King Edward IV died unexpectedly in 1483, his eldest son, Edward V, a boy of just 12 years old, became king. Elizabeth Woodville, as Queen Dowager, was now in a precarious position. Her power rested on her son's legitimacy. However, Edward IV's younger brother, Richard, Duke of Gloucester, was appointed Lord Protector for the young king. Richard of Gloucester, known for his ambition and military prowess, quickly moved to isolate and undermine the Woodville family. He seized control of young King Edward V and his younger brother, Richard, Duke of York, placing them in the Tower of London, ostensibly for their protection, prior to Edward V's coronation. The 2 young princes, sons of Elizabeth Woodville, were last seen alive in the Tower of London. In the summer of 1483, they simply vanished from public view. Their fate remains one of the great unsolved mysteries in English history, but the common belief was that they were murdered, likely on the orders of their uncle Richard, Duke of Gloucester, who then claimed the throne for himself as King Richard III. The disappearance and presumed death of the princes in the Tower, Elizabeth Woodville's sons, effectively extinguished the direct Yorkist male line of Edward IV and solidified Richard III's hold on power. This dramatic turn of events the usurpation of the throne by a royal uncle, and the mysterious fate of the young heirs shocked England and further destabilized the already volatile political landscape. However, Elizabeth Woodville had another child whose fate would ultimately bring an end to the Wars of the Roses and usher in a new era for England. Her daughter, Elizabeth of York, with her sons presumed dead and her family's power shattered, Elizabeth Woodville, the shrewd survivor, began to strategize with her former enemies, the Lancastrians. She entered into a crucial alliance with Margaret Beaufort, the formidable mother of Henry Tudor, the leading Lancastrian claimant to the throne. This alliance resulted in a powerful political compact. Henry Tudor would invade England, and if he succeeded, he would marry Elizabeth of York, daughter of Elizabeth Woodville. This proposed marriage was brilliant. It would unite the warring houses of Lancaster through Henry Tudor and York through Elizabeth of York, potentially ending the decades-long civil war. In 1485, Henry Tudor invaded England, landing in Wales. At the Battle of Bosworth Field, he decisively defeated and killed King Richard III. Henry Tudor was immediately crowned King Henry VII, establishing the Tudor dynasty. True to the agreement in 1486, Henry VII married Elizabeth of York, the daughter of Elizabeth Woodville. This marriage was not merely a symbolic gesture. It brought together the last major claimants of both the Yorkist and Lancastrian lines, combining their disparate claims and forging a new, stronger royal lineage. The union was widely celebrated as the definitive end of the Wars of the Roses. Elizabeth of York, daughter of Elizabeth Woodville, became Queen of England and bore Henry VII several children, most notably the future King Henry VIII. The birth of Prince Arthur and in Henry VIII solidified the Tudor claim and ensured the succession of a new dynasty. The Tudor rose, a combination of the red rose of Lancaster and the white rose of York, became the emblem of the new era of peace and unity. Elizabeth Woodville, through the tragic fate of her sons, the princes in the Tower, and the strategic marriage of her daughter, Elizabeth of York, played a direct role in ending one of England's most brutal dynastic conflicts. Her son's disappearance paved the way for Richard III's usurpation, which in turn provoked the final confrontation that brought Henry Tudor to power. Her daughter's marriage provided the vital dynastic legitimacy that solidified the Tudor claim and brought an end to the Wars of the Roses. Elizabeth Woodville, a queen who endured immense personal suffering and political upheaval, ultimately saw her children become instrumental in changing the very structure of English monarchy, bringing forth a new dynasty and a new chapter of peace after decades of civil war. Number 2. Philippa of Hainault. Philippa of Hainault, born around 1314 in the county of Hainault, came from a distinguished European noble family. Her father, William I, Count of Hainault, Holland and Zeeland, was a powerful and influential figure in the Low Countries. Her strategic marriage in 1328 to Edward III of England was orchestrated during the regency of Isabella of France and Roger Mortimer at a time when Edward was still a young king. This union, designed to secure an alliance with a powerful continental count, would prove to be one of the most successful and enduring royal marriages in English history, not only in terms of political stability but also in the sheer number and influence of the children. She was known for her compassion, her intelligence, and her active involvement in court life. She often interceded with her husband on behalf of petitioners and demonstrated a keen interest in economic development, particularly supporting the Flemish wool trade, which was vital to England's prosperity. She served as Regent of England multiple times during Edward III's absences on campaign, showing administrative capability and strength. Her most significant contribution to history, however, was through her prolific childbearing. Philippa of Hainault bore Edward III a remarkable 14 children. a staggering number for the time, of whom 9 survived to adulthood. These children, especially her sons, would become central figures in the ongoing 100 Years' War and would establish dynastic lines that profoundly shaped the future of England. Her eldest son, Edward, born in 1330, became known to history as Edward the Black Prince. He was a paragon of chivalry and a formidable military commander, epitomizing the ideals of English knighthood during the early phase of the 100 Years' War. The Black Prince, son of Philippa of Hainault, played a pivotal role in England's early successes against France. He led English armies to decisive victories at the Battle of Poitiers in 1356, where he famously captured King John II of France, holding him for ransom. This victory, following the earlier success at Crécy, solidified England's military reputation and had a massive impact on French royal finances and prestige. The Black Prince's campaigns in France, though often devastating to the French countryside, secured English territorial gains and demonstrated the effectiveness of English military tactics. He was a symbol of English prowess and ambition on the continent. While the Black Prince never became king himself, dying before his father in 1376, his son, Richard II, inherited the throne, thus continuing the direct royal line. However, Philippa's other sons also had immense historical impact, particularly in establishing powerful cadet branches of the Plantagenet dynasty. John of Gaunt, Philippa's third surviving son, born in 1340, was perhaps the most influential of her children. After the Black Prince, he was a powerful and immensely wealthy magnate, Duke of Lancaster, and a key figure in English politics during the later years of his father's reign, and the minority of his nephew Richard II. John of Gaunt, son of Philippa of Hainault, wielded vast influence and served as a de facto regent during Richard II's youth. He also launched military campaigns in France and Castile, asserting his own claim to the Castilian throne through his second marriage. Crucially, John of Gaunt was the father of Henry Bolingbroke, who would later depose Richard II and become King Henry IV, founding the House of Lancaster. This act of usurpation, directly stemming from the lineage of Philippa's son, would set the stage for the devastating Wars of the Roses in the following century. Another significant son was Lionel of Antwerp, Duke of Clarence, Philippa's second surviving son. Though he died relatively young, his daughter Philippa married into the Mortimer family. This lineage became a key rival claim to the English throne. His descendants, particularly the Yorkist line, would later challenge the Lancastrian kings, leading directly to the bloody dynastic struggles of the Wars of the Roses. Edmund of Langley, Philippa's fifth son, became the Duke of York. His descendants would also play a crucial role in the Yorkist claim to the throne, forming the other side of the conflict during the Wars of the Roses. Thomas of Woodstock, her youngest son, Duke of Gloucester, was another powerful magnate who clashed with Richard II, highlighting the tensions within the royal family that were a direct consequence of the numerous powerful sons. Philippa of Hainault, by providing Edward III with a multitude of ambitious and capable sons, inadvertently laid the groundwork for future dynastic strife. Her children, through their military leadership in the 100 Years' War, their political maneuvering in England, and their strategic marriages extended the Plantagenet reach and influence. The Black Prince's military victories defined an era of English military dominance. John of Gaunt's ambition and his son's usurpation began the Lancastrian line and directly contributed to the later Wars of the Roses. Lionel and Edmund's descendants provided the Yorkist claim, ensuring that the struggle for the English throne would be a family affair for generations. Philippa's children, through their individual actions and the powerful family lines they established, profoundly shaped the course of English royalty, determining who would wear the crown and how brutally, for centuries after her death. Number 3. Isabella of France. Isabella of France, born around 1295, was a princess of the powerful Capetian dynasty, the daughter of King Philip IV of France, known as Philip the Fair. Philip IV was a formidable ruler, known for his relentless consolidation of royal power and his willingness to defy the papacy and other European rulers. Isabella grew up in a court that valued power, ambition, and shrewd political maneuvering. In 1308, at the age of 12, she was married to Edward II, King of England, as part of a peace agreement between France and England. This union was intended to cement relations between the two long-standing rivals and resolve territorial disputes, but it would ultimately become a catalyst for one of the longest and most devastating conflicts. Isabella became Queen of England, but her marriage to Edward II was notoriously unhappy and politically turbulent. Edward II was perceived as a weak and ineffectual ruler, often favoring male companions and alienating his powerful barons. Isabella, a proud and intelligent woman from a more effective royal household, found herself increasingly moralized and frustrated by her husband's policies and personal behavior. She was known for her beauty and charisma, earning the nickname She-Wolf of France from later chroniclers, a testament to her fierce determination. Isabella of France bore Edward II several children, but her most significant child for the future of England and France was her eldest son, Edward, born in 1312. This boy, later known as King Edward III, would grow up to be one of England's most celebrated warrior kings, and his claim to the French throne, inherited through his mother, would ignite a century of warfare. The political situation in England deteriorated rapidly under Edward II. King's reliance on unpopular favorites like Hugh Despencer the Younger alienated the English nobility, leading to open rebellion. In 1325, Isabella seized an opportunity to escape her suffocating marriage and political isolation. She traveled to France, ostensibly on a diplomatic mission to negotiate a peace treaty with her brother, King Charles IV of France. While in France, she refused to return to England, publicly denouncing her husband and forming an alliance with Roger Mortimer, a powerful exiled English baron, and her lover. Together, Isabella and Mortimer orchestrated a daring invasion of England in 1326. They landed with a small force, but quickly gained support from the disaffected English nobility and populace. The invasion was overwhelmingly successful. Edward II found himself deserted by his subjects and was captured. In 1327, in an unprecedented move, Edward II was deposed from the throne by Parliament. His young son Edward was proclaimed the new king as Edward III. This event was a profound shift in English governance, demonstrating that a king could be removed from power by the will of his subjects, even if primarily driven by a powerful queen and her allies. Following her husband's deposition and subsequent death in captivity, Isabella of France, along with Roger Mortimer, effectively ruled England as regents for her young son, Edward III. Their regency, however, was marked by its own unpopularity, particularly due to Mortimer's greed and arrogance. It was the young Edward III, son of Isabella, who ultimately asserted his own power. In 1330, at the age of 18, he staged a coup d'etat, arresting and executing Roger Mortimer and effectively removing his mother from active political power. From this point forward, Edward III ruled England in his own right, demonstrating a strong, decisive will that would define his reign. The most monumental consequence of Isabella of France's life came through her son, Edward III, and his claim to the French throne. When Isabella's brother, King Charles IV of France, died in 1328 without a male heir, the direct Capetian line came to an end. This created a profound succession crisis. Edward III, as the son of Isabella, was the nephew of the deceased king and the closest living male relative. He asserted his claim to the French throne through his mother, arguing that although Isabella herself could not inherit the throne, she could transmit the right of inheritance to her son. However, the French nobility, unwilling to be ruled by an English king instead, invoked Salic law and chose Philip VI, a cousin of Charles IV. Establishing the House of Valois, this rejection of Edward III's claim, despite his initial homage to Philip of Aquitane, ultimately ignited the Hundred Years' War. In 1337, Edward III, son of Isabella of France, formally asserted his claim to the French crown and launched a series of invasions that would devastate France for generations. The Hundred Years' War, fueled by Edward III's claim and the ongoing disputes over Gascony, transformed both England and France. It saw epic battles like Crécy, Poitiers, and Agincourt, establishing England's reputation for military prowess and introducing new military tactics, like the longbow. It fostered a burgeoning sense of national identity in both countries. As they rallied against a common enemy, the war led to immense loss of life, widespread destruction, and political upheaval on both sides of the Channel. Isabella of France, through her personal ambition, her dramatic overthrow of her husband, and critically through the son she bore, directly set the stage for this titanic conflict. Her son, Edward III, by pressing his claim to the French throne as a direct descendant of the Capetian kings, through his mother plunged Europe into a protracted war that reshaped borders, fueled nationalisms, and influenced military development for over a century. The she-wolf of France not only changed the king on England's throne, but through her son, all through the course of French history forever, by providing the pretext for devastating and foundational conflict. Number 4. Blanch of Castile. Blanch of Castile, born in 1188, was a princess from the powerful kingdom of Castile in what is now Spain. She was the daughter of King Alfonso VIII of Castile and Eleanor of England, making her a granddaughter of the famous Eleanor of Aquitane. This prestigious lineage connected her to two of Europe's most prominent royal houses, ensuring her place in high-stakes politics. Her marriage in 1200 to Louis, the eldest son of King Philip II, Augustus of France, was a crucial diplomatic coup. It was part of the Treaty of Le Goulet, designed to solidify peace between France and England after years of conflict, effectively uniting the bloodlines of former enemies. This union positioned Blanche at the very heart of the Capetian dynasty, one of the most enduring royal families in medieval Europe. Blanche became Queen of France in 1223 upon her husband's ascension as Louis VIII. However, her most profound influence on French history, and indeed European history, would come through her children, particularly her son, Louis IX. When Louis VIII died unexpectedly in 1226, Blanche was left a widow at the age of 38, with a 12-year-old son, Louis, as the new king. The challenge was immense. The French monarchy, though growing in power, still faced resistance from powerful, semi-independent vassals, and the kingdom was still recovering from internal conflicts. Blanche of Castile immediately assumed the regency for her young son. Her regency, which lasted until Louis IX came of age in 1234, and even continued in spirit during his absence on crusade, was a period of extraordinary stability and assertion of royal authority. She faced down multiple baronial revolts, most notably the coalition led by Peter Mauclerc, Duke of Brittany, and Hugh X of Lusignan. Blanche, through a combination of military action and diplomatic skill, managed to suppress these rebellions, preventing the fragmentation of the kingdom and consolidating royal power. She even negotiated the Treaty of Paris in 1229, which brought a formal end to the Albigensian Crusade in southern France, securing valuable new territories for the Cromley into the French realm. Her leadership during the Regency provided a stable foundation for her son, Louis IX, to inherit a kingdom that was stronger and more unified than it had been in decades. Louis IX, son of Blanche of Castile, matured into a king whose reign would become a golden age for France. He was known for his deep piety, his commitment to justice, and his administrative reforms. He established royal courts and a system of provosts and bailiffs to administer justice throughout the kingdom, often sitting personally to hear appeals under the famous Oak of Vincennes. These reforms strengthened royal authority and ensured a greater degree of fairness and order in the kingdom, laying the groundwork for a more centralized state. Louis IX's piety led him to undertake two major crusades to the Holy Land. The Seventh Crusade, 1248 to 1254, saw him lead a large French army to Egypt, where he was captured and held for ransom. Despite the military failure, his commitment to the crusading ideal and his personal sacrifices earned him immense respect across Europe. His Second Crusade, the Eighth Crusade in 1270, ended with his death in Tunis. These crusades, though militarily unsuccessful, demonstrated the moral and spiritual leadership of France in Europe and further cemented Louis's reputation as a devout monarch. Beyond military campaigns, Louis IX, son of Blanch of Castile, was also a skilled diplomat. In 1259, he signed the Treaty of Paris with Henry III of England. This treaty aimed to resolve the long-standing disputes over English claims to French territory that had simmered since King John's losses. While Henry III formally renounced his claims to Normandy, Anjou, Maine, and Poitou, he was granted Aquitaine as a fief from the French crown. This agreement, negotiated by Louis IX, established a framework for peace, though it also laid the groundwork for future conflicts, as Duke of Aquitaine, and the French king would be a constant source of tension. Louis IX's reign saw significant cultural achievements. He was a major patron of the arts, leading to the construction of magnificent Gothic cathedrals like Sainte-Chapelle in Paris. He also promoted education and scholarship, supporting the University of Paris. His reputation for justice and piety was so strong that he was canonized as a saint by the Catholic Church in 1297, becoming Saint Louis, the only French monarch to achieve sainthood. Blanch of Castile, through her masterful regency and her diligent upbringing of her son, directly provided France with one of its most revered and ample monarchs. Her efforts to consolidate royal power and maintain stability during Louis's minority allowed him to inherit a kingdom ready for his visionary leadership. Louis IX, through his legal reforms, his crusading endeavors, his diplomatic initiatives, and his commitment to justice, profoundly strengthened the French monarchies and created a period of internal peace and prosperity. His actions laid the solid foundations for the later assertion of French royal power and contributed significantly to the development of a distinct French national identity. Combination of Blanche's political acumen and Louis IX's moral authority and administrative genius transformed France into a leading power in medieval Europe. A transformation directly traceable to the son she raised and guided through his early years. Number 5. Eleanor of Aquitane. Eleanor of Aquitane, born around 1122, was arguably the most powerful and influential woman of the High Middle Ages. Her life story was filled with unprecedented power, multiple royal marriages, and an enduring legacy. As the Duchess of Aquitaine, she inherited one of the largest and wealthiest territories in France, a vast domain that dwarfed the personal lands of the French king. Her first marriage to Louis VII of France made her Queen of France. This union, though it produced no surviving sons, was marked by her strong will and adventurous spirit, famously accompanying Louis on the Second Crusade. However, it was Eleanor's second marriage that truly ignited a historical blaze, fundamentally reshaping the political landscape of England and France. In 1152, her marriage to Louis VII was annulled. Just 2 months later, she married Henry Plantagenet, Duke of Normandy and Count of Anjou, who was 11 years her junior. This marriage had immediate consequences. It brought her vast Aquitaine inheritance under Henry's control, making him the most powerful vassal in France, a man who controlled more French territory than the King of France himself. 2 years later, in 1154, Henry became King Henry II of England, and Eleanor became Queen of England. This union forged the vast Angevin Empire, a sprawling dominion that stretched from Scotland to the Pyrenees, covering England, Normandy, Anjou, Maine, to reign, and Eleanor's own Aquitane. Eleanor of Aquitane bore Henry II 8 children who survived to adulthood, 5 of whom were sons: Henry the young king, Richard the Lionheart, Geoffrey, John Lackland, and William. These sons, raised in an environment of immense power and constant political maneuvering, would become the central figures in a dramatic family saga that ripped apart the Angevin Empire and reshaped the destiny of England. The relationship between Eleanor and Henry II, and between Henry II and his sons, was famously tumultuous. The sons, particularly the elder ones, were ambitious and eager for power, often encouraged by their mother, who frequently found herself at odds with her autocratic husband, Henry the young king. The eldest was crowned co-king of England during his father's lifetime, but never received the independent power he craved. He rebelled against his father multiple times, drawing his brothers Richard and Geoffrey into the conflicts. These rebellions were not minor family disputes. They were major wars, involving French kings, powerful nobles, and vast armies severely destabilizing the Angevin Empire. Richard II's son eventually inherited the mantle of rebellion from his brother Henry the young king, who died in 1183. Richard, later known as Richard the Lionheart, was a fierce warrior and brilliant military commander. He allied with the King of France, Philip II Augustus, against his own father. Their combined pressure ultimately led to Henry II's death in 1189, paving the way for Richard's accession to the English throne. Richard the Lionheart, son of Eleanor of Aquitaine, became one of England's most legendary kings, primarily known for his crusading zeal and military exploits during the Third Crusade. He spent very little time in England during his 10-year reign, viewing his English kingdom primarily as a source of funds and manpower for his continental ambitions and crusader campaigns. His absence led to administrative challenges and resentment among some of his English subjects. Upon Richard's death in 1199, the succession passed to Eleanor's youngest surviving son, John. John, later known as King John, proved to be an even more able figure, though his legacy is often associated with failure and controversy. King John, son of Eleanor of Aquitaine, immediately faced challenges to his claim from his nephew Arthur of Brittany, the son of his deceased brother Geoffrey. John eventually captured Arthur, whose subsequent disappearance and probable death further tarnished John's reputation. John then engaged in a protracted and ultimately disastrous war with Philip II, Augustus of France. He lost nearly all of England's continental possessions, including Normandy, Anjou, Maine, and Touraine, by 1204. This immense territorial loss was a monumental turning point. It effectively ended the vast Angevin Empire and forced the English monarchy to focus its attention and resources almost entirely on England itself, rather than its vast French holdings. The loss of these continental territories reshaped English identity and governance. English kings, no longer primarily French dukes, ruling over large swathes of France, began to identify more strongly with their island kingdom. This shift also meant that the English aristocracy, many of whom had held lands on both sides of the Channel, were forced to choose between their English and French loyalties, leading to a more distinctly English baronial class. Furthermore, King John's unpopularity, his heavy taxation to fund his lost wars, and his autocratic style led to widespread rebellion among his barons. This culminated in 1215 with the forced signing of Magna Carta at Runnymede. Magna Carta, a document extracted from King John by his rebellious barons, was a landmark in English constitutional history. Placed limits on royal power, established the principle that even the king was subject to the law, and guaranteed certain rights to his subjects. While initially a peace treaty for a civil war and often disregarded by subsequent kings, Magna Carta eventually became a foundational document for concepts of liberty, justice, and limited government, influencing Eleanor of Aquitane's children, particularly Richard and John, through their constant conflicts, their pursuit of crusading glory, their military failures on the continent, and John's disastrous reign. Dramatically altered the trajectory. Richard's crusading and his continental focus set a tone for a reign spent largely away from England. John's catastrophic loss of Normandy and other French territories led to the dismantling of the Angevin Empire, fundamentally changing England's relationship with the continent and forcing a focus on its island identity. His desperate measures then led to the signing of Magna Carta, a document that defined the legal and political relationship between the English monarch and his subjects. Eleanor of Aquitaine, through the sons she nurtured and struggled with, directly brought about the end of one empire and the birth of a new kind of English monarchy, whose impact would echo for generations. Number 6. Empress Matilda. Empress Matilda's life was an extraordinary saga of ambition, misfortune, and relentless determination, placing her at the heart of one of England's most tumultuous periods. Born in 1102, she was the daughter of Henry I, King of England and Duke of Normandy, and Matilda of Scotland. Her mother's lineage connected her to the ancient Anglo-Saxon royal house, giving her a potent claim to both Norman and Anglo-Saxon legitimacy. Matilda was not destined for a quiet life. At a very young age, she was sent to Germany to marry Henry V, the Holy Roman Emperor, making her an empress, a title she would proudly retain throughout her life, even after widowhood. This marriage elevated her to the highest rank in Christendom, associating her with immense power and prestige across Europe. However, the most pivotal turn in Matilda's life and a catalyst for profound changes in English history came with the death of her husband, and then the tragic loss of her only legitimate brother, William Adelin, in the White Ship disaster of 1120. William's death left her father Henry I without a legitimate male heir. Faced with a looming succession crisis, Henry I took the unprecedented step of declaring Matilda his only surviving legitimate child, his heir to the English throne in the Duchy of Normandy. This was a radical departure from tradition. England had never been ruled by a queen, regnant in her own right. Henry I compelled his powerful barons to swear an oath to recognize Matilda as his successor, a promise that many would soon break. In 1128, Matilda married Geoffrey Plantagenet, Count of Anjou, a powerful French noble. This union was strategic, aiming to secure alliances and produce more heirs for the English crown. They had several children, but their most significant son for the future of England was Henry, born in 1133. This boy, known to history as Henry II, would become the first Plantagenet King of England, but his path to the throne was paved with a fierce, protracted conflict, unleashed by his mother's disputed claim. When Henry I died in 1135, the oath sworn to Matilda proved fragile. Many English and Norman barons, unwilling to accept a woman ruler and wary of the influence of her Angevin husband, seized the opportunity to back a male claimant. Stephen of Blois, Matilda's cousin, swiftly crossed the Channel and seized the English throne. This act ignited a devastating civil war that would engulf England for nearly 2 decades, a period famously known as the Anarchy. Empress Matilda, the determined daughter of Henry I, returned to England in 1139, ready to fight for her rightful inheritance. She gathered supporters, and for years her forces clashed with those of King Stephen across the country. Castles were besieged, lands were ravaged, and the authority of the crown collapsed. The war was brutal and chaotic, characterized by shifting allegiances, widespread lawlessness, and immense suffering for the populace. Matilda herself demonstrated remarkable resilience and military prowess, at one point even capturing King Stephen. She was briefly recognized as Lady of the English and entered London, but Her efforts to be crowned queen were thwarted by the city's inhabitants and the return of Stephen's supporters. Although Empress Matilda never truly secured the English throne in her own right, her unwavering struggle ensured that the claim to the throne remained firmly within her lineage. Her son Henry grew up amidst this relentless civil war. As he matured, he became an increasingly active participant in his mother's cause, leading military campaigns in England and developing a reputation as a capable young commander. He learned the harsh realities of governance and warfare in a fractured kingdom. The years of conflict, fueled by Empress Matilda's refusal to abandon her claim, led to a desperate need for peace and stability. By the early 1150s, both Stephen and Matilda's forces were exhausted. A critical turning point came with the death of Stephen's eldest son and heir, Eustace, in 1153. This removed a major obstacle to a negotiated settlement. The Treaty of Wallingford, also known as the Treaty of Winchester, was signed later that year. This landmark agreement brought an end to the anarchy. Under its terms, Stephen would remain king for the rest of his life, but he recognized Empress Matilda's son, Henry, as his heir and successor. Upon Stephen's death in 1154, Henry, the son of Empress Matilda, smoothly ascended the English throne as Henry II. His reign marked the beginning of the powerful Plantagenet dynasty, a line of kings who would rule England for over 300 years and fundamentally shape its identity. Henry II was a remarkably energetic and intelligent ruler. He immediately set about restoring royal authority and repairing the damage caused by the anarchy. He dismantled illegal castles, restored crown lands, and crucially reformed the English legal system. He established a system of common law, royal courts, and assize judges who traveled the country, laying the foundations for the legal framework that still influences common law systems. He also expanded English influence and territory, creating a vast Angevin empire that stretched from Scotland to the Pyrenees. Empress Matilda, though she never wore the English crown as queen regnant, was the direct catalyst for the Plantagenet accession. Her tenacity in pursuing her claim, her relentless fight against Stephen, and her ability to produce a viable male heir in Henry ensured that the English crown ultimately passed to her bloodline. Her son, Henry II, inherited a broken kingdom, but his mother's enduring struggle had ensured that the throne was awaiting a capable ruler from her line. His reforms, his expansion of power, and the dynasty he founded were all direct consequences of the long and arduous struggle initiated by his mother's unyielding pursuit of her rightful inheritance. Matilda's life story is a testament to the power of a mother's ambition to shape the destiny of an entire nation through her children. Her sons Henry and the younger ones, like William X, also played roles in solidifying the Angevin power base, but it was Henry II who utterly redefined the English monarchy. Number 7. Matilda of Flanders. Matilda of Flanders, born around 1031, was a woman of formidable lineage and spirit. She was the daughter of Count Baldwin, the fifth of Flanders and Adela of France, placing her among the highest echelons of European royalty. Her mother was a daughter of King Robert II of France, making Matilda a direct descendant of the Capetian dynasty. In a medieval world where bloodlines were paramount, Matilda possessed a pedigree that was second to none. Her marriage to William, Duke of Normandy in the 1050s was initially controversial due to alleged consanguinity, but it eventually received papal dispensation. This union was not merely a romantic pairing, it was a political powerhouse, combining the wealth and strategic location of Flanders with the growing military might and ambition of Normandy. Matilda proved to be a steadfast and influential consort to William, who would soon earn his famous moniker, the Conqueror. While William was campaigning, Matilda often served as regent in Normandy, demonstrating administrative competence and a keen understanding of governance. She was known for her piety and support for the church, and her presence at William's court lent legitimacy and prestige to his grand designs. However, her most enduring impact on history would come through the children she bore for William. These were not just any royal offspring. They were the future rulers of a new Anglo-Norman realm. individuals who would shape the destiny of England for generations to come. Among Matilda's many children, 3 sons stand out as particularly pivotal: Robert Curthose, William Rufus, and Henry I. These brothers born into the dynamic and often violent world of the 11th century. Their father, William the Conqueror, famously invaded England in 1066, claiming the English throne and fundamentally altering the course of English history. When William died in 1087, his lands and titles were divided, setting the stage for decades of fraternal conflict. William had bequeathed Normandy to his eldest son, Robert Curthose, and the newly conquered Kingdom of England to his second surviving son, William Rufus. His youngest son, Henry, received a significant sum of money but no land. This division, a product of William the Conqueror's will, directly led to intense rivalries among Matilda's sons. Robert Curthose, as Duke of Normandy, consistently sought to claim the English throne, believing it was his birthright. William Rufus, as King of England, was equally determined to hold on to his crown and even expand his power into Normandy. Their conflict plunged the Anglo-Norman realm into periods of instability and warfare. William Rufus, son of Matilda of Flanders, was a formidable and often ruthless king. He largely secured his hold on England and even extended his influence over Normandy, often through military campaigns against his brother Robert. His reign from 1087 to 1100 saw the consolidation of Norman power in England and the strengthening of the royal administration. However, the line of succession was further complicated by the sudden and mysterious death of William Rufus in 1100 while hunting in the New Forest. This unexpected event propelled Matilda's youngest son, Henry I, onto the English throne. Henry, who had been present in the New Forest at the time of his brother's death, immediately seized the royal treasury and quickly had himself crowned. This swift action bypassed his elder brother Robert Curthose, who was away on the First Crusade, and therefore unable to assert his claim effectively. Henry I, son of Matilda, proved to be an exceptionally astute and decisive ruler. He understood the need to consolidate his power and legitimate his rule. Henry I's reign was marked by a relentless struggle to unite Normandy and England under his single rule, and to secure his dynasty. He faced direct challenges from Robert Curthose, who eventually returned from the Crusade and attempted to invade England. In 1106, at the Battle of Tinchebray, Henry I decisively defeated and captured his brother Robert. Robert Curthose remained a prisoner for the rest of his life, effectively removing him from the political chessboard. This victory meant that England and Normandy were once again united under a single ruler, a crucial step in the formation of the Anglo-Norman monarchy. Matilda of Flanders' son, Henry I, then focused on consolidating royal power within England. He implemented administrative reforms, strengthened the royal courts, and began the process of integrating the Norman conquerors and the Anglo-Saxon populace. He also married Edith of Scotland, a descendant of the old Anglo-Saxon royal house, symbolizing a deliberate effort to bridge the cultural divide. Although their children's succession would be fraught with peril, Henry I laid much of the groundwork for the future stability of the English monarchy. Children of Matilda of Flanders, through their fierce struggles for power, directly shaped the early history of the Anglo-Norman realm. Robert Curthose's constant challenges forced William Rufus to strengthen royal power in England. William Rufus's sudden death opened a door for Henry I, who, through his decisive actions and subsequent victory over Robert at Tinchebray, cemented the union of England and Normandy. This unification was a critical step in creating a powerful, centralized English state, distinct from its continental origins. The struggles among these brothers, sons of Matilda of Flanders, were not mere dynastic squabbles. They were the crucible in which the fundamental structures of English monarchy, its administrative systems, and its territorial claims were forged. Their ambitions, their conflicts, and their ultimate fates directly determined the early path of the English crown and the political shape of the England itself, establishing a lineage that would endure for centuries. The Norman dynasty, established by their father, was secured and shaped by the bitter fraternal rivalries of Matilda's own sons, establishing lines of power that would ripple through history. Number 8. Agnes of Puatu. Agnes of Puatu lived in a period of intense religious and political fervor in the heart of the Holy Roman Empire. Born around 1025, she was a princess from the powerful Duchy of Aquitaine in France, a region known for its rich culture and strong feudal lords. Her marriage in 1043 to Henry III, the Holy Roman Emperor, was a grand political alliance designed to solidify connections between the German and French realms. She was crowned empress, a position that placed her at the very center of European power. Henry III was a strong and capable ruler who largely controlled the church within his territories, appointing bishops and even popes, a practice that was common at the time but would soon become a flashpoint for massive conflict. Agnes and Henry III had several children, but their most significant child for the future of Europe was their son, Henry IV. Born in 1050, young Henry was destined to inherit an empire that was about to be rocked by one of the most profound struggles of the Middle Ages. Agnes became a widow in 1056 when Henry III unexpectedly died, leaving her as regent for her 6-year-old son, the new Holy Roman Emperor, Henry IV. This was an immensely challenging role. The empire was a complex web of powerful dukes, counts, and archbishops, all with their own ambitions. As a foreign-born Empress Dowager, Agnes faced numerous challenges in maintaining authority and securing her son's inheritance. She made concessions to powerful nobles, granted significant fiefs, and even sought to avoid direct conflict with rising papal power, possibly as a strategy to stabilize the empire during her son's minority. During Henry IV's minority, a powerful reform movement within the Catholic Church gained momentum. This movement centered around the idea of papal supremacy and the Church's independence from secular control, directly challenged the emperor's traditional right to appoint church officials, a practice known as lay investiture. When Henry IV came of age and took full control of his empire, he inherited this brewing storm. His reign would become synonymous with the investiture controversy, a conflict that would fundamentally reshape the relationship between church and state in Europe for centuries to come. Henry IV, son of Agnes of Puatu, believed in his imperial prerogative, the ancient right of emperors to appoint church officials within their domains. He saw bishops and abbots not only as spiritual leaders but also as powerful feudal lords who held vast lands and commanded armies. Their loyalty was crucial to his rule. However, Pope Gregory VII, a fierce advocate for papal reform, saw lay investiture as a grave sin that corrupted the church and undermined spiritual authority. He aimed to make the papacy the ultimate spiritual and even temporal power in Christendom above all kings and emperors. Conflict between Henry IV and Pope Gregory VII escalated rapidly. In 1075, Gregory VII issued a decree strictly forbidding lay investiture. Henry IV, asserting his traditional rights, defied the decree and appointed his own bishops. Gregory VII responded with the most potent weapon at his disposal: excommunication. In 1076, he excommunicated Henry IV, effectively declaring him an outcast from the Christian community and releasing his subjects from their oaths of loyalty. This was an unprecedented act against a reigning emperor. The excommunication had immediate and devastating consequences for Henry IV. Many German princes, always keen to reduce imperial power, seized on the excommunication as a pretext to rebel against him. They threatened to elect a new emperor unless Henry IV sought absolution. Faced with widespread revolt and the potential loss of his throne, Henry IV, the son of Agnes, was forced to make a humiliating journey across the Alps. In the winter of 1077, he traveled to Canossa, where Pope Gregory VII was staying. For 3 days, Henry stood barefoot in the snow outside the castle gates, dressed as a penitent, begging for the Pope's forgiveness. This iconic moment, known as the Walk to Canossa, was a profound symbolic victory for the papacy and a deep humiliation for the imperial office. While Henry IV eventually received absolution and regained some political ground, the investiture controversy continued to rage for decades, becoming a defining feature of his reign and the subsequent reigns of his children and grandchildren. Henry IV spent years battling not only the papacy, but also the various anti-kings elected by rebellious German princes. He eventually marched on Rome, deposed Gregory VII, and installed his own anti-pope. But even then, the struggle did not end. His own son Henry V would later rebel against him, ironically seeking to secure the imperial throne and end the long-standing dispute over investiture. Henry IV, the son of Agnes of Puatu, died in 1106, still excommunicated, his empire deeply fractured by the endless struggle. The conflict initiated by Henry IV, son of Agnes and Pope Gregory VII, had long-lasting repercussions that profoundly reshaped the political landscape of Europe. It stripped the Holy Roman Emperors of their traditional control over church appointments, weakening their power vis-a-vis both the papacy and their own German princes. It also fostered a new sense of distinct spheres of influence, the spiritual realm of the church and the temporal realm of the state, while compromises would eventually be reached, such as the Concordat of Worms in 1122, which distinguished between the spiritual and temporal aspects of ecclesiastical office, the core issue of papal supremacy, and the Church's independence from secular rulers had been firmly established. Agnes of Puatu's son, Henry IV, through his stubborn defense of imperial rights and his ultimately humiliating defeat at Canossa, pushed the boundaries of papal power and inadvertently helped to solidify the papacy's position as a major political force in Europe. His conflict with the papacy set a precedent for future clashes between secular rulers and the Church, profoundly influencing the development of political thought and the balance of power throughout the medieval period. The events of his reign created a blueprint for centuries of political maneuvering between spiritual and temporal authorities, a legacy that can be directly traced back to the struggle initiated by Agnes's boy emperor. The sheer scale and intensity of this struggle, sparked by Henry IV, irrevocably altered the structure of medieval governance and the role of the Church within it. Number 9. Ermengarde of Hezbard. Ermengarde of Hezbard stepped onto the stage of history at a time when the Frankish Empire, under the iron will of Charlemagne, was reaching its sprawling zenith. Born around 778, she was the daughter of a powerful Frankish count, a man who held significant sway in his region. Her lineage placed her firmly within the aristocratic circles of the Carolingian world, a world where alliances were forged through strategic marriages and children were the ultimate assets. Her destiny was sealed when she married Louis the Pious, a prince who, at the time of their union, was not the most obvious successor to the towering Charlemagne. Charlemagne had several sons, all vying for recognition and influence, and the future of the vast Frankish realm, which stretched from the Pyrenees to the Danube, from the North Sea to central Italy, seemed uncertain in its succession. Ermengarde's early life with Louis saw him as King of Aquitane, a sub-kingdom on the southwestern periphery of the empire. It was there that she began to bear the children who would eventually change the course of European history. Their sons, Lothair, Pepin, and Louis the German, grew up in the shadow of Charlemagne's immense legacy, instilled with the complex Frankish traditions of both imperial unity and divisible inheritance. The Frankish custom often dictated that a father's lands be divided among his sons, a practice that contrasted sharply with the Roman ideal of a single, indivisible empire. Charlemagne himself had struggled with this dichotomy, initially planning to divide his realm among his own sons before death intervened and left Louis the Pious as the sole heir. This precedent and the constant tension between unity and division would define the lives of Ermengarde's children. In 814, Charlemagne died, and Louis the Pious ascended to the imperial throne, bringing Ermengarde with him to the heart of the empire. She was crowned empress, a position of immense prestige and influence. As Empress, Ermengarde played a significant role in her husband's court, though her true legacy would come through the lineage she provided. She gave birth to 3 sons who survived to adulthood, each destined for a kingship. Lothair, the eldest, was crowned co-emperor with his father in 817, a bold move by Louis the Pious to establish a clear line of succession and ensure the imperial title remained intact. The Ordinatio Imperii, the imperial ordinance of 817, outlined a plan to preserve the empire's unity under Lothair, while Pepin was given the sub-kingdom of Aquitaine and Louis the German received Bavaria. This early attempt at ordered succession was a direct response to the historical pattern of fragmentation, a testament to the foresight of Louis, and by extension the influence of those around him, including Ermengarde. However, Ermengarde's life ended in 818, just 4 years into Louis's reign as sole emperor, and before the full extent of the challenges to his rule or the true nature of her son's ambitions. She did not live to see the relentless struggles that would define the latter half of her husband's reign. Her sons, now grown men with their own territorial interests and armies, watched as their father remarried and had another son, Charles the Bald. With his second wife, Judith, this new child shattered the carefully laid plans of 817. Louis the Pious, desiring to provide for his youngest son, began to reconfigure the partitions of the empire, consistently diminishing the portions originally promised to Ermengarde's sons. The reaction from Ermengarde's children was explosive. Lothair, Pepin, and Louis the German felt their inheritances were being threatened, and their royal positions undermined. Their discontent quickly escalated into open rebellion. These were not minor skirmishes. These were full-scale wars with armies clashing across the Frankish lands. In 830, and again in 833, Ermengarde's sons united against their own father, orchestrating his capture and temporary deposition. This was an astonishing act of defiance against their reigning emperor, a man who had inherited the mantle of Charlemagne. They paraded their father, stripped of his imperial regalia, and forced him to confess to various sins, publicly shaming him. The spectacle horrified many across Europe, highlighting the deep fractures within the imperial family and signaling a profound shift in power dynamics. While Louis the Pious eventually regained his throne, the damage was irreparable. The empire was destabilized, its authority questioned, and the bonds of family shattered beyond repair. Upon Louis the Pious's death in 840, the already simmering tensions erupted into a full-blown civil war between Ermengarde's surviving sons, Lothair and Louis the German, and their younger half-brother, Charles the Bald. Pepin had died in 838, leaving his own heirs who continued to press their claims. Conflict reached its climax at the Battle of Fontenoy in 841. A brutal and devastating engagement where Frankish fought against Frankish, resulting in heavy casualties on all sides. The sheer scale of the fratricidal conflict underscored that the unified empire, once the bedrock of European order, was destined for division. 2 years later, in 843, the 3 surviving brothers gathered in the city of Verdun. There they signed the Treaty of Verdun, a document whose clauses would permanently redraw the political map of Western Europe. This treaty divided the vast Carolingian Empire into 3 distinct independent kingdoms. Lothair, the eldest, received the Middle Frankish Kingdom, a sprawling, awkward territory that included the imperial capital of Aachen and stretched from the Low Countries through Burgundy and into Italy. Louis the German received the East Frankish Kingdom, the lands largely to the east of the Rhine River, which would eventually form the core of the Holy Roman Empire in modern Germany. Charles the Bald received the West Frankish Kingdom, the territories to the west which would become the basis of modern France. The Treaty of Verdun was not just a bureaucratic agreement. It was a foundational moment for 2 of Europe's most enduring nation-states. The boundaries drawn by Ermengarde's sons through their relentless pursuit of individual power and their willingness to wage war against family laid the groundwork for the future separation of France and Germany. The Middle Kingdom, Lothair's portion, proved inherently unstable and was repeatedly fragmented and absorbed by its stronger neighbors, leading to centuries of territorial disputes. particularly over regions like Lorraine, that continued to spark conflicts well into the modern era. Manard of Hezbard, who lived and died before the empire fractured, gave birth to the very individuals who, through their ambition and conflict, literally tore apart a unified blueprint of Western Europe. Her son's relentless struggles were not merely squabbles over land. They were the violent birth pangs of distinct national identities.